Hello, hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Okay, just for be mindful of time, I would start, and maybe I would start with a little introduction of me. My name is Franco. I'm Italian. I spent 10 years as a consultant in BCG. I joined as an intern. I left just before becoming partner. Also did a break during my consulting experience for my MBA that I studied in Singapore. After my experience as a consultant, I became an entrepreneur. I'm running my own company. And so basically, these are my major two experience in life that, uh, yeah, kind of complementary. And I'm a dad of a nice girl, avid football fan. Not gonna disclaim what team I'm supporting, but that's it. That's me. So we're gonna stay together for a couple of hours, and we're gonna discuss about problem solving. It's gonna be a continuation of what you already done last week. So maybe the first couple of minutes, I want to just reconnect to what you already saw last week, and then building up from there. So, uh, quick disclaimer. So this copyright notice, you're gonna also receive the document after this meeting. Keep it for your eyes only, of course. I want to start asking a question. What do you think is the main difference between a businessman and a scientist? Businessman or businesswoman and a scientist? Of course, there are many, but I just want to hear your opinion. What do you think is the main difference? Alfonso, for example.
The methods, the strategy, the tools, the knowledge, the background.
Okay, good points. Rafael?
Yeah, I would go on the same front, right? Tools, methodology, maybe how depth they need to go in each topic, the time they have to execute a project. Yeah.
But these are all good points. Actually, yeah, it's method, process. And what we're going to try to do today is to bring a little bit of science, method, approach, structure to business. That's the objective of today. So a couple of logistics information. I want to keep as much as possible these sessions as interactive as possible. So please step in, ask questions, uh, raise your hand for asking question or write in the chat. We're gonna also have some dedicated Q&A break every 20 minutes, half an hour. So if you have any specific question that you wanna ask in any specific moment in time, feel free to step in and raise the hand. Otherwise, you can just write down your question, park it for a second, and then we're gonna address it in the Q&A session. We're gonna have also a 30 minutes break. So please pay attention, don't use the phone. We're gonna have some time to catch up with your emails later on. So quick reminder, last week you started the problem solving analysis. You talk about problem definition and problem structuring. Today we're gonna build up from there. So we're gonna start with pre-analysis diagnosis, and we're gonna cover all the rest of the 8 steps of the problem solving. So as a recap, we also use the Kong-Wong basis example in the last chapter. We define the problem, we structure the problem, and we deep dive on the ease of buying tickets. And we're gonna use the exact same example also today, and we're gonna continue across the 8 steps of the problem solving approach. So in the toolbox, hopefully, if you follow the last session in the toolbox, in your problem solving toolbox, now you should have some concept of structuring, brainstorming, prioritization. These are going to be super useful. Also today, we're going to apply all of them in the following steps of the problem solving session. So it's also a refresher in your mind of what you already studied. As I told you, we're going to use Kong-Wong basis as a kind of example throughout the whole sessions today, but also solving your problem with the same approach, with the same problem solving approach. Okay, let's start. Let's focus on steps 3, pre-analysis diagnosis. This is going to be probably the part of the process where you're going to spend most of the time. As you see in the menu, there are 4 different topics. We're gonna prioritize root cause, storylining, preparing some slides, and create a work plan. We're gonna go through each of them. We wanna spend time here because it's probably the phase that most people that are not structured, they don't know how to approach analysis, how to approach problem solving, skip. So when they have a problem, they identify potential root cause and they immediately jump to analysis, try to prove the root cause, completely skipping this part of the analysis that is the most important and is going to save a lot of time and a lot of energy in your work life. So let's dive into it. So I guess that all of you are familiar with the Pareto or 80-20 rule. So 20% of the root cause explain 80% of the effect. Actually, it can be 80-20, 70-20, 8-10. Just a reminder, 80-20 is not the sum up of 100%, means that 20% or whatever, 10% of the root causes explain 80-70% of the results. So we're going to apply this Pareto principle to be efficient and focus on what really matters. So prioritization, there are different ways to prioritize root causes. The first one is based on experience. Last time, in the last session, you came up with a lot of potential root causes of the problem of Kong-1 buses. The first way to prioritize and decide which one are the more relevant is using your experience. This really depends on, of course, what kind of analysis you're doing in your experience based on that specific topic, but that's one approach. Is the quickest way to the prioritization, but I want to also to introduce a more structured method to prioritize root causes. So we're going to go through different steps. We're going to recap the definition of the problem. We're going to define some dimensions through which we're going to prioritize the root causes. Then we're going to rate each root cause, each hypothesis based on this dimension. And then we're going to focus on the hypotheses that are most relevant based on these dimensions. So let me explain to you how it works. So basically, we're going to create a matrix 2 by 2 with 4 quadrants. Usually the dimension that we use are the likelihood of that specific hypothesis to be true and the effort that we're going to require to analyze whether this hypothesis is true. I'm going to show in a minute also how this applies to our example to be a bit more practical. So as I told you, we can use a matrix 2 by 2, and we're going to use this approach. This is a typical consulting approach when we need to prioritize hypotheses, but we can also have a lot of other criteria with matrix 2 by 2 or also tables with more dimensions. Today, we're going to focus on the most common way to prioritize hypothesis, that is the 2 by 2 matrix. So let's apply to the Kong-1 buses case that you saw last time. So last time you generated a few potential hypotheses on the root causes on why people are not choosing buses over other means of transportation. So this is an example of 7 potential root causes. What we're going to do now is try to position each of these hypotheses in our matrix. As I told you, it's a 2 by 2 matrix. One dimension is a likelihood that that specific hypothesis is true. And the other dimension is the impact of that hypothesis on the bus usage. So this is an arbitrary example of where to position the hypothesis. This is done purely on expertise. So this is a top-down assessment. Hypothesis by hypothesis, we define whether each of them fall in which quadrant of the matrix. Is that clear? Okay, let's try to move on. So I want you to take home 3 key takeaways. Always prioritize your hypothesis. So you're going to come up with a long list of hypotheses. If you don't do prioritization up front, you're going to boil the ocean, as they say. So you're going to waste a lot of time without any specific prioritization. So prioritization is something that should always be done once you define potential hypotheses. Second, as I told you, we can go by experience or by method. A method is the best approach. when you have time to do that, because you can back up your prioritization. You can justify why you prioritize one hypothesis over the other. And the third suggestion for you is always to leverage the team, because it's a top-down assessment of each hypothesis on our matrix, involving other team and their opinion, make the valuation of different hypotheses more robust and less dependent on a single point of view. So what we have done now is, starting from the long list of hypotheses, we generate a prioritization. So in our matrix, basically, we have a quadrant that is the top right, that are the hypotheses, in this case is 4 and 5, that are the one with the highest likelihood to be true and the highest impact on potential bus usage. So we do the prioritization. Next step is creating a storyline. So far, we are just working with hypotheses that are not validated yet. That's important to stress. But we want still to create a preliminary storyline based purely on hypothesis not validated. So starting with our prioritization matrix, we have the 4 quadrants. We can prioritize the hypotheses that are more likely to be true. So for example, in this case, it's 4, 7, 6. We can also decide to, if you want to do a stricter prioritization, focus just on one quadrant. In that case would be the top right, so just 4 and 7. Or we can also expand maybe to the top left if you have time to, if you want to be more comprehensive on the hypothesis to prioritize. In our example, let's decide that given our time available, we want, out of the 7 hypotheses that we developed last time, we want to focus on 4, 6, and 7. So ticketing machines are often broken and not present. Modern options like Apple Pay are unavailable, and there are too many different types of tickets, and this is confusing users. So now, how can we create a storyline once we identify these hypotheses? I don't know if you remember the pyramid principle that we discussed previously. So pyramid principle basically is the concept of the idea should start with the main point first, and then should be grouped and supported by evidences. Should be like a pyramid. Main point first, and then evidences at the bottom. So we're going to do more or less the same approach here. We identified 4, 7, and 6, the hypotheses that you see at the bottom of the slide: ticketing machines and kiosks station are often broken, and so forth. So what we are doing here is we have a major issue that buying tickets is more challenging than it should be. And then we have supporting hypotheses that explain why this is happening. We group the 3 hypotheses in 2 major groups. So the fact that ticketing machines in kiosk and station are broken and their modern options are not available, we consolidated in a macro category where we say that it's often not possible for user to complete the purchase, while the other option, the other hypothesis that there are too many types of tickets and these are confusing the users, we group in a separate category that users cannot decide what tickets is right. So basically here we created a sort of pyramid. At the bottom we have the prioritized hypothesis that explain why buying tickets for the buses is more challenging than it should be. The preliminary storyline that I want you to create is based on hypotheses that you've prioritized earlier. It's super important, again, the prioritization, otherwise you're gonna have a lot of different concepts. Some of them are maybe minor, not realistic, with not much impact. So you want really to focus just on a prioritized hypothesis. So now we have a series of hypotheses, we group them in buckets, and we want to create a preliminary storyline. Let me show how everything connects from the beginning of the journey on problem solving till now. So what we did at the very beginning was identifying the problem and the initiatives. Now we prioritize the hypotheses. So we selected 3 hypotheses that are more likely to be true and that are easier to validate. And then now we are creating a storyline based on the hypothesis. We're going to address this later on in another session, especially in slide writing, but I want to give some concept already on how to prepare as preliminary slides for your storyline. So here we have 3 hypotheses in our Kong 1 case. I want each hypothesis to take one single slide, and each hypothesis should be backed up by some evidences. This is a spoiler. Again, we're going to address this more in depth later when we're going to talk about how to prepare slides. But again, each slide should address one hypothesis with an action title, and then the content of the slide should provide some evidences, some fact that back up the title, that back up our hypothesis. I stressed maybe last time, but once again, never do analysis randomly. You need to explore only the hypotheses that you prioritize, that are the ones that are more interesting to support your analysis. So this is why having some work before jumping into the analysis is super important. Okay, so let's try to recap here what we've seen. So we say that we can prioritize based on experience, if you have the capability. So we have a long list of hypotheses. We select the ones that are more relevant based on our previous experience, or we can use a method. Using a method basically means to give some dimensions. We give an example of a 2x2 matrix, so two dimensions, but it can also be single dimension, multiple dimension, you choose. So you position each hypothesis with a qualitative assessment on this matrix on 2 dimension. So you can choose the ones that maximize whatever dimension you chose. For example, the likelihood to be true and the impact on whatever topic you're analyzing. So once you prioritize either by experience or with this method, you can start to create a storyline. Basically mean to put one hypothesis per slide and start to think what to put inside the slide. We're going to talk in a second on how to create each single slide. So far we created a sort of storyline starting from a long list of hypotheses, prioritized, and put each one of them in a single slide. Okay, let me stop for 5 minutes here before proceeding. Next step will be to talk about how each single slide in our preliminary document will look like. But do you have any questions so far?
Hi, Franco. I have one question. Can you explain a little bit further the experience method, the 80-20 principle? It wasn't that clear for me.
Yeah, thanks. So let me go back with this slide. So basically, here we are talking about a potential approach on using the experience. So what we're discussing here is that once you generated a long list of root cause hypotheses, often, let me say always, a part of them explain most of the problem that we are analyzing. So the rule 80-20 or Pareto rules says that most of the time, 20% of the root causes that we identified explain 80% of the impact, 80% of the problem. 80-20 is a general rule. It's not always 80-20. Can be whatever, 70-20, 80-10. But what is always true, what always holds true, is that only a small part of the hypothesis explain most of the impact. So it doesn't make sense to analyze everything because it's going to be a waste of time. So the point is how we can identify this 20%, 10%, 30%, this small portion of hypothesis that really explain the impact. Well, the first point that we said is let's use experience. So maybe you already done something similar, maybe some part of the team or your superior boss or some colleagues, whatever, already have some experience in that specific domain. That's already a starting point. It's probably the quickest way to do it. You can go through all the hypotheses and based on previous experience or whatever, you can already say, look, these 50% are not useful. Actually, they are minor points. They're not really explaining the issue. So this is the experience approach. You can also combine, we say, the experience approach and the other method with the matrix. You can also combine the two. You can do a force cut based on your experience. You say, look, there are 10 different hypotheses. Based on my experience, hypothesis, I don't know, 8 and 10, well, they're very minor. So let's take it out. So I have 8 hypotheses left, and then I use the matrix approach to analyze this. Don't know if it makes any sense.
It makes sense. Thank you very much.
No problem. So,
Oh, excuse
any other
me.
question? Yeah, please.
Yes, I have a question, and it also relates to one in the chat about like prioritization by experience. What if you're in a situation where you don't have experience or familiarity with the topic? Is that something that you go to, like, I think someone asked if you go to the client who has the relevant expertise, or how do you recommend you try to
Yeah.
gain that expertise to prioritize?
Yeah. So first of all, sorry, I didn't see the chat now. I'll try to see if there is any open question. But anyway, to come to your question, I mean, this is the standard situation. So when there is a problem, most of the time you don't know. It's the first time that you encounter it. So when you are in this situation, the most simple approach, again, is to use the method. So basically, you create some dimension and you assess top-down it's a preliminary top-down assessment, the hypothesis on the different dimensions. I would suggest you to do that in a team with other people and basically use common sense, not experience, but common sense. Having said that, before jumping into this approach, what I would try to do, I don't know if all of you are working as a consultant. I don't know what's your specific job and what's your setting in your company. But before jumping into this matrix exercise, that is very good because you can explain, justify your prioritization. But before jumping into that, I would involve not the client, but other people, especially senior people, your direct boss. I don't know how's your organization, how your company is organized, but your direct boss, because most likely he or she has some more experience than you. So will help already cut out part of the hypotheses that maybe are not relevant. So involving other people, especially senior people in your organization, for me is always the first approach before doing any kind of assessment, any kind of analysis. Once you've done that, if you cannot rely on your experience, it's common sense. You're not committing on specific hypotheses because then we're gonna validate the hypothesis. So now it's just consider it as a sort of prioritized brainstorming. So we have some hypotheses that we still need to validate. So for example, if you don't have experience, you use your common sense and you screw up. That's not the end of the world. Then you're gonna validate, you're gonna see that that hypothesis doesn't hold. We're gonna see later on in the session today. So don't be scared. It's just the first step. You need to start somewhere, so you need to prioritize the hypothesis. You don't have experience, you really don't know how to prioritize, use common sense. If they're not perfect, that's fine. We're gonna reiterate later on. I will explain you why. I don't know if it makes sense. So let me quickly also catch up on the chat. There's something that is typically done with the client that has the relevant expertise. So involving the client, again, also here it depends. If you're working with the client, it could be internal or external client, doesn't matter. If you're working together with a client team, so as a working team, yes, definitely they have experience, so you can use them to have the first cut of hypothesis. If and it happens quite a lot in consulting, you don't have a mirroring team at the client side, but the client is the senior people that should receive your recommendation. Well, I would not involve the senior people of the client early on in the project. This is something preliminary phases of the project that you should do internally. So again, if you have a junior team at the client working with you, yes, involve them. That's very good. Otherwise, I would rely mostly on internal people for this phase of the project. Because it's just at the very beginning, you don't want to involve in these preliminary phases, the senior people at the client side. For a two matrix that are in default, for what dimensions must be. So actually, the dimensions, I give you some example, but it can vary. In my opinion, out of my experience, when I need to prioritize hypotheses, I use these two dimensions, but it's not a rule. But in my opinion, the most interesting are likelihood that that hypothesis is true. So is a minor thing, or actually this is something real, and the impact on the problem that we're analyzing. So for example, hypothesis X, we can say this is probably true. So on one dimension is on the top quadrant, and the other dimension is, if it's true, is generating a lot of impact for the specific problem we are analyzing. Yes, well, that's top quadrant. If one of the two questions is no, that's probably not a top priority. So if this is, I'm not sure it's true, maybe it's an hypothesis we generated, but it's not really true, or this is true, but the impact on the problem you're assessing is very minor, well, actually deprioritized. Good, so let's move on. I think we are okay with time. Okay, so we prioritize the hypothesis. We kind of generated a storyline, meaning one slide per hypothesis. Now I want to go more in detail explaining what I want to do in these slides. Let's call it ghost slide. Let me minimize the chart. So, okay. So ghost slides are basically the current version of the end deliverable. Current meaning at the very beginning of your project. You don't know anything yet, but still you need to do the effort of creating a sort of forced version of the final deliverable. You just have hypothesis, you have not run any analysis, so it's difficult. Out of my experience as a consultant, this was probably one of the most challenging mindset change that I had to do at the very beginning of my career. So don't rely just on fact or analysis, but do the effort of creating a kind of storyline with slides earlier on when I don't know basically anything. So what you need to do that? Sorry. So this is an example, real life example of ghost slide made on paper. I love using paper. When I do brainstorming, when I need to create visualize slides, when I still don't have data, I like to do it on paper before going on PowerPoint, but you can also do it on PowerPoint. I think doing with my hand helped me visualize a bit better. But this is an example of a real life ghost slide done on paper. So let's take the example of Congo on buses. To recap, we identified 3 hypotheses, the one that you see on the bottom. And I want to take one hypothesis, the ticketing machine in kiosks and stations are often broken. And we're going to try to create a slide, preliminary slide. We don't know anything. It's just an hypothesis. Maybe it's not true. Maybe it has very little impact. We don't know yet. But let's try to create a slide. So, pyramid principle. Each slide should respect the pyramid principle. There should be a title with what you want to prove, and then some evidences that back it up. So each slide has only one message, and the message should be the hypothesis that you want to validate. And then you should, in the content, in the core of the slide, put from 1 to 4 supporting points so that the message is backed up by some evidences. It becomes a fact. So we take the hypothesis as the main message. Ticketing machine in kiosks and stations are often broken. Now we need to create some evidences, but we don't know anything yet. So what we need to do now is one of the most challenging exercise is try to imagine how you can back up, how you can justify your hypothesis. So ticketing machines in kiosks and stations are often broken. Well, how can I do it? How can I justify it? How can I prepare a slide that can justify this point? You can use quantitative data, qualitative data, quotes, pictures, whatever you want. And you need to think what would be a nice slide that would justify this point. For example, this is an example, we can imagine to create a chart that show broken ticket machines by location. We can show some pictures of the broken ticket machine. We can use quotes from customers that explain that there is a problem. There are broken ticket machines. Again, these are hypotheses. We don't know yet. We don't even know if we will be able to do the chart. And that's fine. For the time being, that's fine. Nice to have. We would like to have this chart with vertical bar showing ticket machines broken by location. This is an ideal output. Maybe you're not going to be able to do that, but that's not a problem now. We try to create a slide, ideal slide. And this is how a dummy slide will look like. So we put in terms of content, we put a potential bar chart with dummy numbers. This is completely dummy because we don't know anything yet. We put a couple of pictures, dummy pictures, not related. Here, just a reminder that as a placeholder, here we're going to put some pictures of broken machines, and we put a couple of quotes. Also, another thing that we can do is improving the title. Also here, introducing hypothesis. We don't know how many machines are broken. Let's assume it's 30%. Why? Why not? This is a top-down hypothesis assumption. It can be 30, 80%. You can put whatever number you want. So basically, this is a slide that shows what you want to do, what analysis you want to do, what you want to represent, but all data and numbers are dummy because we don't know yet. This is already good in case you need to provide, you need to show, you need to share the progress of your document with the client or the boss. You can already show what you have in mind. So what kind of analysis you want to do, what kind of message you want to give. even though there is no evidences yet, but this is a super important output. Okay, so a couple of insights. The furthest you can visualize your slide at the very beginning, the easier will be then to do alignment, as I was telling you, with a client, with your boss. You can already show, look, this is slide I want to do. These are placeholders, but this is what I want to do. And once we decide what to put in the slide, what pictures, what quotes, then we are already basically driving what kind of analysis we're going to do later. Okay, so I want you to do some exercise now. So I want you to pick one hypothesis from your storyline and create a ghost slide. Ghost slide, as a reminder, we have a title that basically is the hypothesis. You can refine it introducing numbers that are dummy numbers, and you need to identify what content you want to put to prove that that title. So I want each of you to do the exercise alone. You're gonna have 8 minutes to prepare your dummy slide, your ghost slide, and then you're gonna join in small breakout rooms to present your piece of work. In case any of you doesn't have any hypothesis to validate because maybe you didn't attend the previous session, you can work with the hypothesis at the bottom of the slide. So training a frontier AI model now consume whatever gigawatt per hour of electricity, equivalent to powering whatever households for a year. So you can work on this. This is going to be your hypothesis, and you want to create the ghost slide around it. So it's 36 on my watch. Let's meet again at, let's go in breakout rooms at 44. So Sophia, you will create the breakout rooms at 44, and then you're gonna, then you're gonna join in groups and explain your work that you did. Good. Feel free to switch off the camera when you want to work, and let's meet up later. Welcome back. Okay. Good. So how was the exercise? Was it difficult? Easy? Winifred, I see that you're shaking your head.
I wouldn't say it was difficult, but definitely had to maybe think through who the final audience was to know the kind of like supporting information would be most useful for them. That was because I did the training in frontier AI model. So I was like, oh, maybe what are they interested in per se, so that we could also begin tailoring that into like the full story. That's what I thought.
So you raise a good point, that is tailoring the type of analysis you want to do based on the audience. For given a specific example out of my experience, but probably you can also relate. So depending on what point you want to prove, you need to ask yourself whether the audience, your target audience, is already on the same page, or you need to struggle to convince them. Depending on how far you are from convincing them, then you can maybe just have one single point. Maybe it can also be a quote, and that's going to be enough to support your point. Or maybe you need extensive analysis, quantitative analysis, because the audience is doubtful. So knowing the audience, specifically knowing, if you're lucky enough, knowing what points will be the most difficult to pass through to the audience, will determine how complex will be your work on the specific hypothesis. Again, if something that is likely and has a lot of impact on the problem that you are analyzing, so it's a prioritized hypothesis, but it's obvious, everybody agrees, you still need to put a slide because it's a key piece of your communication, of your storyline, but very basic qualitative backups, one quote, 2 images, whatever, are enough. So yes, that's a good point. Knowing the audience can change a bit the type of analysis you will do. As a reminder, here we have not done any analysis yet. We are at the very beginning of the work. So then we're gonna see later on that the type of content that you put in the slide can change. So today we ideally want to put a chart. We discover that we cannot create the chart because we don't have the data. Super common. So we need to go back and try to refine the content. But okay, good point. Any other feedback from this exercise? I'm asking you this because I struggle when I was at the beginning of my BCG career in creating slides before having data. It's not just a pure exercise, it's a mindset change. So I need to already think about the communication, what I want to prove, how, before even touching a single number, a single Excel file. That's not easy. So any other point? Did anybody of you find it difficult? So G Tere Pins, sorry, I don't know your name. I just read your, so I see that you are nodding.
Sorry, it's Gabriella. Yes,
Gabriella.
I found it a bit difficult. I think being concise, but at the same time spreading the message, it's a bit hard for me.
Okay. So let me take a step ahead because AI can help us on this. Sorry, let me. Okay, good. So you already in the previous session you saw some tools that can help you with problem solving. As always, is never a single interaction with AI, but it's a layered approach. So it's back and forth from your work, support of AI, back to you and back to AI again. And also today. So last time, what you saw was how to use AI for the problem definition and for problem structuring. Today, we're going to introduce another AI tool that can help you improve your slide, exactly the ghost slide that you prepare now. And in particular, this AI tool will do two things. They will improve your action title and give you suggestion on how to better test the hypothesis of your title. It's developed using real world learnings from a lot of different consulting projects, so it's super useful. It starts from your raw data coming from the slide that you prepared and give you some suggestion how to improve titles and how to improve the tentative analysis, pieces of analysis that you want to use to prove the title. Little reward for you. Today you're gonna have the opportunity to unlock a brainstorming online course of 1 hour and a half, completely for free, if you do two submissions. One is the one that I'm explaining now, and then we're gonna see a second one later on today. So basically, I want you to use the GPT tools that Sophia will share in a moment to evaluate your ghost slide. So after this class, I ask you to finish this ghost slide or do another one, you choose, and use this AI tool to evaluate it. And then I want you to submit the conversation that you had with GPT to show that actually you use the tool to validate your slide with the link that has been shared with you. And together with the other deliverable, I will discuss later on. If you submit both the conversation, then you will unlock this brainstorming online course. So to share the GPT conversation, you need to click on the share button, the three dots on the top right of your screen and share the conversation. There should be a URL in the chat that you need to use to do this. Please do that at the end of this session. You can use the slide that you prepared today and just try to validate and improve it with ChatGPT. So quick overview of how AI will help on this part of your work on the problem solving. So you design the storyline, then you can use AI to give you input about the storyline so you can finalize it. Storyline basically is putting together all the prioritized hypotheses. You create the ghost slide, as you did now. You upload it on the AI tool that has been just shared with you. So you have a final ghost slide. And you can do that for each ghost slide. So you improve title, you improve the potential analysis, supporting analysis that can support the title. So we just look from a very high level how to do a slide. There's going to be an entire session about creating amazing slides. So I'm not going to spend more time on this topic, but it was useful just to know, what you need to do at the very beginning of your of your problem-solving analysis, of your problem-solving process to structure your analysis. So let's move on. We prioritize the root causes. We created a storyline. For each slide of the storyline, we created a ghost slide. Now the last step is creating a work plan. So all the ghost slides are dummy slide. Nothing in the slide is based on fact. So we need to decide how we're going to approach the analysis. So you see here an example of a work plan. Is very detailed. You don't need to have this detail, but for example, you can have the main issue that you're analyzing, the different root cause, and then for each root cause, you put what analysis you decided on your ghost slide to have. For example, the root cause was the kiosk machines are broken, and then the analysis are the bar chart about the broken machine, take some picture about broken machine, and collect some quotes from customers. These are the analysis. So based on the analysis, you need to understand what are the data that you need to collect. For example, to do the bar chart about the broken kiosk by region, you need to collect the number of total kiosks and the number of broken kiosks so you can show the share for each location. And then you can appoint a responsible and a deadline for each of the data required. You don't need every time to do such a structured way, such a structured work plan, but I think this is a nice way, especially if you're responsible of the process and you need to validate it with your boss, a nice way to show, look, these are all the hypotheses that we prioritize. For each of them, we would like to do these 3 analyses. For these 3 analyses, we would need these 10 pieces of data, and I would ask person XYZ by date XYZ to provide this piece of data. Most of the time, this data will come from the client, data collection. And so here you have an overview. If it's on Excel, you can also filter by deadline, by responsible person. So it's very useful. For example, real experience from consulting project I've done. I was doing exactly this kind of work plan, and then I was filtering by responsible. So I had the exact data needed to run my analysis. Data request is a super critical moment of a project. You need to do it as early as possible because you need time to do the analysis. And at the same time, you need to be very precise. I don't know if you ever had you have ever been in a situation where you ask for data, but you don't really know what data you need. That's very difficult because you cannot communicate to the client or whoever is providing data what you need. So this whole exercise of creating ghost slides goes exactly in this direction. You know exactly what data you need. Exactly. So you have a set of 10 slides. For each of them, you have 2, 3 supporting points. And if you have these 20 pieces of data, you can fill up all the 10 slides. So you know exactly what are the pieces of data. You can appoint a responsible. And if you collect everything, and if the analysis support your hypothesis, then you're done. So super important to be done early on in the project, super important to be done very precisely. Okay, so to recap, we have a problem structure. We prioritize the root cause hypotheses that are that make more sense on different dimensions. We created a storyline, 1 slide per hypothesis, and now we created a work plan to collect all the data to perform the analysis. I would ask Sophia to run the poll on the analysis. Take a couple of seconds to answer. How can we ensure we only do useful analysis and avoid wasting time? Let's see. Okay, wow. Very good. So, so before moving on, let me restate once again, because I think it's an important message, and especially because I've been in consulting quite long enough, also as a senior, to see this as one of the major weakness of associate consultants, whoever. So you need to do your ghost slide first. You need to understand what data you need. You need to ask for this set of data immediately, because if you don't do this piece of work immediately, you're not going to have enough time to run the analysis. So all this needs to be done very quickly, validating internally with also your project leader, principal, whatever. So you can collect analysis, you can collect the data, you have enough time to do the analysis. because chances are, and will happen for sure, that some analysis will disprove your hypothesis. So we show that your hypothesis is not correct, and you need to go back and reiterate. So the analysis part will take time. You need data as early as possible. And this is the process-wise one of the major mistake of junior people, of maybe boiling the ocean, start to do analysis, whatever they have, without putting their mindset first and thinking, what slide I want to create. Once you created the cost slides, only then you can think about the analysis. Good. So let me move on. And Q&A. So any question? Trying to see if I can. Unfortunately, I cannot see the chat. Let me stop sharing 1 second. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, let me see the chat. Sorry. No, there's no question. So any question? Emma, I know that you have some question. I can see it.
I guess one question that I do have is, how do you know when to, it feels a little counterintuitive to be spending a lot of time and effort into developing the Go slides
Yeah.
if you haven't already got any evidence to support your hypotheses. Like, how do you know where to draw the line on how much effort to put in, knowing that you don't want to A, waste time, and then B, just be proving what you want to prove if you don't really have any real evidence going in? It's like, how do you justify that time investment?
So it's a huge time investment. Fully agree. And also will feel that you're not progressing, because maybe it will take several days. It's not a matter of hours. It will take several days, and you have not any evidence, any data. So definitely I can see the feeling. And also I can see that since everything is basically is done by you, basically you're just working on your hypothesis. There is nothing, no fact that proof or disprove the direction you're taking. So definitely I can see it. But think the other scenario. You don't do this exercise and you start to collect random pieces of data. And it happens super frequently. This is the exact recipe for disaster, especially if the problem is complex, because you're gonna collect some pieces of data, then you start to analyze, then something else comes to your mind, maybe the analysis is not going the right direction. You're always chasing the client to collect new pieces of information because you want to run another analysis, another deep dive, and you don't have a direction. You're all over the places. You're boiling the ocean, as they say. So I agree, it's an investment of time. I agree it's frustrating because it seems things are not progressing. But the other scenario is that in the very first few days, maybe you start to prepare some content, but then it's gonna take hell of a time to have a structured approach and structured conclusion. So it's an investment you need to, especially if the project is particularly complex. So I don't know if the answer you were expecting, but I agree. It feels like a waste of time. It's not. In the big scheme, this is the only way to have a structured approach and a structured output, and be quick to do that. Also, another problem, if you don't do this piece of work at the very beginning, on top of doing a lot of analysis, and most of them are not going to be useful, is that your final document will not follow a precise logic. So if you start from the analysis and then you put the analysis on slides, then you will not use the pyramid principle and the communication will not be clear and smooth. If you think upfront, what's the communication? So what are the key messages in a structured way with the pyramid principle, and only after you think about what analysis you need to support the messages, the final document, the final communication will be much clearer. So probably this is even more important than wasting time on many analyses. If you don't do this investment upfront, is the communication. Communication will be unstructured, not clear, not linear, because you started from the analysis. Instead, starting from the communication, ensure that at the end of the day, what you're gonna say make a sense as a logical flow behind it. And trust me, if you don't trust me, try the different approaches, and I can guarantee, I can promise you that if you don't follow this work upfront, creating a ghost slides and the storyline, you will not be able to create a proper document, clear document for a senior audience. I can promise you.
That makes sense. I think looking forward to seeing how further along the line you adapt based on what you find out,
Yeah.
like trying to prove your hypotheses.
That's exactly the next step, because so far we don't have any data, we don't have any fact. It's just hypotheses internally made, internally judged, internally prioritized. Maybe can happen that we don't have data to run the analysis we wanted to do, and will happen for sure. It can happen that data prove that our hypothesis is wrong, and will happen for sure. So let's see. So let me share my screen again. Sorry, just 1 second. Can you see it full screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. We need to validate the hypothesis. So why do we need to validate the hypothesis? Because in business, all the recommendation, all the messages should be fact-based. Cannot be, well, maybe if you are super senior with a lot of experience in the industry, what you say is enough to convince the client, both internal, external, but 99% of the time, you need some fact. Also maybe light fact, not too detailed, not too quantitative, but some fact to support your hypothesis. So what we used to say that a hypothesis dream is to become a fact, because it's kind of a process. You start with an hypothesis, but at the end of the day, you need to prove fact. So how can we prove hypothesis? There are a lot of different ways. You can see yourself, so we can observe, we can do expert calls that can give that expert opinion. We can have case studies, we can run analysis, we can do customer interviews, focus groups. We can do a lot of stuff. As I told you before, there was a nice question coming from you. It was more a statement. So also, what kind of way you use to support an hypothesis also depends on how difficult you think will be to convince the client about the specific point. Sometimes a light, maybe a confirmation with an expert is more than enough. Some other times you need some quantitative data because you know that some statement will not be enough to convince. So let's try to do some examples. So what validation method would you use to support the hypothesis there is no way to buy tickets online? Caroline?
I was typing, speak for yourself.
Exactly. Let me see if there is a chart. Okay, there was a question. Okay. Exactly. This is very easy. Okay. So what validation method is the most appropriate to back up the fact that users often do not buy tickets because they get confused with the number of ticket types, and customers get discouraged because tickets need to be renewed every 2 weeks. Okay, in the chat. Customer interviews. Okay, yeah. Or focus group. One of the two. Okay, yeah. So again, some cases it's pretty obvious, some other times maybe you decide how to approach it. My recommendation is try to use the simplest possible path. So sometimes you can either back it up with super advanced analytics, big Excel models, and sometimes it's needed because the client needs to be convinced or because your boss asked for it. Some other times maybe a focus group or just maybe it takes less time to go on site and prove it with a couple of pictures than, to do some analysis. So try to use the simplest possible path to it. Advanced analytics now is much more accessible with AI. So this makes part of analysis easier. But again, I would not do unnecessary analysis if we have shortcut. One suggestion I can give you is if from your Go slide there is one analysis that you think is relevant, but it will require a lot of time, first ask yourself, is there a shortest way? Maybe it's not as effective, but can give 80% of the backup that a proper analysis would do. And then I would ask your boss, your project leader, whoever your boss, what's the best way to invest your time? Well, actually, I would not ask what's the best way. I would go to your boss and propose and say, look, in my opinion, I would invest 2 days to do this piece of analysis because it's more important. Alternatively, I can also take a shortcut. It will take a couple of hours. do you agree to invest my time for this piece of analysis? So in general, I would never go to your boss asking what do you think is best. I would always provide your point of view with an alternative, so your boss can decide among the two alternatives. But in general, the simplest path is always the best one. Okay, so now we have our storyline with a ghost slide. We need to do the data collection, and then we see the type of analysis. So data collection, there are a lot of different ways to collect data. There are primary source or secondary. Secondary basically means that the data already been edited by somehow. There is a report, for example, or a synthesis or other document done by your company on similar topics. Primary, instead, you go at the root of the information. Maybe you collect it yourself. You can collect it internally, previous project, interviews with senior people, with experts, or externally, most likely at the client side, can be quantitative or qualitative. So it depends. So the data source is super important because the quality of the data that you collect are going to be directly proportional to the quality of the analysis that you will deliver. So that's why, again, let me state once again, the work plan that we saw before, where we list all the data that you want to collect, should be done early on, share with the client or whoever can provide the data, and be very specific. If you're not specific, I tell you, out of my multi-years experience as a consultant, client will not understand. So if you don't say exactly what you want, and maybe follow up also with a call, send an email and then follow up with a call, 80% of the time, the client will screw up, will send something that is partial, sometimes because they don't have the data, but sometimes because they don't understand. So quality of data is super important. So let's recap. We say that Ghost slide has one main message, that is your hypothesis with some supporting points. You need to create a Ghost slide with the main message and some ideas of supporting point. Then you create a work plan, mostly for data collection. And then we need to validate the hypothesis, collecting data with different method. And the method is strongly impacted by the type of analysis, of course, but also the type of audience. Okay, so it's okay, let's do this. Let's take a 30 minutes break now. Then the second part will be 2 hours. So please take a rest, drink a nice cup of coffee. We're gonna meet again at 50. It's 5:20 at my time, so at 50. Okay? Thank you. See you later. Hello. Welcome back. Okay, let's do it. So we have a 2 hours session. I know it's Friday night. You're tired, I guess. Bear with me. We're gonna have a break of 5 minutes in the middle of this last session, and I will try to make it as interactive as possible. Otherwise, again, I'm gonna lose you. So where we are now. So we discussed about all the upfront investment that you need to do to prioritize the hypothesis, create a storyline, create ghost slides for each hypothesis, and then created a work plan, especially for data collection. We saw the data collection can happen in several different ways. Maybe one additional point on data collection before moving on that I didn't mention before. So data collection doesn't come necessarily from other people. It can also be you observing, you going out and interviewing clients. The most critical time-wise is when data collection comes from other people, because it doesn't depend on you. And that specific data collection is the one that you should prioritize in a project, because out of my experience is always the bottleneck. Data don't come, data are not correct, they are not the right one. You need to iterate, and it's gonna waste a lot of time. So doing the work plan for data collection is important. Even more important is to identify data that should come from other people, especially the client, because it's gonna be some back and forth, for sure. Okay, now let's assume that we collected our data. Some are available, some are not. So let's move on. Types of analysis. So there are a lot of different analyses. We group them in three different categories. There are descriptive analysis that try to give a snapshot in time of how the company or whatever we are observing is. For example, there are financial metrics, operation metrics, market analysis, market share, customers, whatever. Or descriptive can be a comparison benchmark, us versus competitor, internal benchmark, historic data versus now, or us versus the average of the market. So this is purely descriptive. Take a snapshot in time of our company and potentially can compare with something else. Oops. Can you see the screen? Right. So a couple of examples of descriptive analysis. This is a chart, pretty complicated. So basically this chart is mapping gross sales and contribution margin of potential stores divided by city. This is a pure snapshot in time. Or this another analysis is basically gross sales in different part of a city that can be useful to define, for example, where to open new stores. This is purely descriptive. There are some tools, I don't know how familiar you are with these tools, that are very useful, very effective in displaying results of big data, Tableau, Power BI. So I think I never use them, so you can survive also without these tools. But again, these are very useful to map out descriptive data. So let's do some exercise. Question to you, what are example of descriptive analysis that you can potentially run for Kongwon buses? Again, descriptive analysis are either a snapshot of the company in time or some benchmark comparison. Who wants to volunteer? Half Wong. Sorry if I mispronounce your names, but so yes, since I'm not.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the Hong Kong, sorry for the descriptive analysis for Kongwon buses, I think we should collect the company snapshot, including the current operation, current operational matrix, like and the market analysis as well, including the customer analysis via surveys or a client interview or
Can you give me an example?
group discussions.
Can you provide some
Sorry?
examples? Can you provide some examples of, for example, of operational matrix that you would like to collect, or anybody else also? Example of potential matrix that you would like to collect.
But
Anybody has ideas on potential? Let's be generic. Again,
On time performance.
Okay. Okay. Let's try to be more specific. For example, what do you mean with performance? I agree, but let's try to be more specific.
The percentage of buses arriving at stops or within an approved time frame.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Okay. Any other idea? Like a comparison, for example, if we want to do some benchmark. For example, we can compare the performance of us versus other players in other cities. Or we can see a trend, historical trend of performance. Okay. So second category is causal analysis. So in this case, it's not a snapshot in time anymore, but we are basically trying to find root cause reasons behind some events. So for example, could be qualitative. So basically we understand from a qualitative standpoint why something happened, or quantitative, correlation, regression. So on correlation does not imply causation. Now I want to give a specific example because this is tricky. For example, here we have a potential chart that shows a correlation between salesperson experience and the monthly sales in stores. So from a force analysis, this is a typical correlation analysis that explain how one dimension, one criteria, for example, the experience of the salesperson, can impact the average sales of a store. Actually, this is a bit tricky because not always a correlation means a causation. Don't know if this concept is clear to you. Let me spend maybe a couple of seconds here. For example, we can also potentially experiences salespeople are staffed in stores that have been on the market for a longer time. That's why they have experience. And stores that have been on the market for longer times have average higher monthly sales. So basically, there is a correlation, that's a fact, but it's not like the experience of the salesperson that is driving the higher average monthly sales, but the time of the stores has been open. So basically, in a nutshell, it's always good to see, if it's possible, to see correlation, but not necessarily correlation means that the two dimensions that they're plotting are one the root cause of the other. They could maybe be triggered by the same root cause, but there is no cause and effect correlation. Anyway, this is an example of a quantitative analysis for a causal analysis. Also here, question to you. Can you give me an example of a causal analysis, qualitative or quantitative, whatever? For example, for the fact that people don't use buses as much as they should do compared to other means of transportation. What kind of causal analysis we can run? Again, causal means that we need to find a sort of correlation, qualitative or quantitative, between the problem that we are analyzing, so buses are not used enough, and some root cause. Sorry for confusing you guys, but yeah.
No,
Also,
that's okay.
yeah, there's also something in the chat.
It's Vaibhav. Yeah, I think just some form of a regression equation with appropriate controls to try and understand that is there reason for us to believe that because people are buying more cars, they're riding the buses less. And I think
Can you say that again? The line broke up. Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah. Just I think regressing bus ridership numbers on concurrent car sales. So if car sales are going up, is that directly leading to people riding the bus less? Okay, that's fine. That's correct. I think that you can also do easier, like, I don't know if it's easier, but focus groups, or talk to clients and understand why this happened. This is qualitative, but fine, what you said is correct. Okay, good. So the last category are predictive analysis. This is more useful, not much for the analysis of root cause, but more for defining improvement actions. So predictive analysis are any analysis that estimate a future impact. Can be business cases, cost-benefit analysis, something that, starting from a problem, estimate the future impact of it. And also here, so this is an example, this is a scenario of how the temperature of Earth on average will increase or decrease based on emissions. This is a predictive analysis. There are some assumptions behind it that project temperature based on emissions. This is, of course, a quantitative and also pretty complex analysis. Question to you, what kind of predictive analysis can you run, specifically starting from the question, from the hypothesis that people don't use buses enough because, I don't know, there are too many broken kiosks. What kind of predictive analysis can you run? So we have a problem, broken kiosks that generate not enough, potentially, that's our assumption, not enough bus rides. What kind of predictive analysis can we run here?
Maybe you could look at like specific kiosks in like high traffic areas and see what would be the effect on like ridership if you fix those kiosks in like particular high traffic locations.
Okay, I like it. I like it a lot. How can you do it? So basically you're saying if you fix the kiosk, there could be some impact on how many people will use the bus. Okay. If you were in a real project, how would you say that, if you fix the kiosk, will be a 20% increase, 40% increase, whatever. How can you estimate the impact of this action?
I think maybe you could get some comparison like data to use, like previous data on like bus ridership, like near, a targeted set of kiosks, like in the past, and then if you address like the issues with those kiosks, you could also track maybe after those fixes are made to see.
Yeah, exactly. We see in the past location with fixed kiosk how the usage of buses changed, and this kind of a quantitative analysis can prove the point. Okay, very good, very good. So don't want to go too much in depth on analysis. You're gonna have a dedicated session, but again, there are different kind of analysis. We just group them in the main categories. You're gonna go more in depth on how to do the analysis later on. So let's go back to our case, Kong buses. So as you remember, this was our ghost slide based on hypotheses, based on nice to have analysis we want to run. We created our work plan. We asked for data, and let's assume that data are not available. Super common. What would you do? What would you guys do? This is a typical scenario. Happen always. You ideally wanted to do that analysis, but data are too complicated, they're not available, they have different granularity. You cannot do it. Yeah, Gabriela?
Maybe search for a different kind of data that can provide a similar explanation or to a similar root cause problem.
Okay, that's a good point. I think that even before, I would ask myself, do I really need this analysis? Are the other points enough to support my statement? In this case, some pictures and some pictures and quotes, probably they're enough. Probably we cannot support a quantitative statement. Maybe we cannot put that 30%. But if you want to be more quantitative, because we need to convince that this is a real problem, the customer, yes, we need to look for a different analysis that is a substitute. So before jumping to another analysis, ask yourself, okay, without this, maybe I collected some pictures and some quotes. Is this enough? It depends on what kind of statement I need to back up and what kind of audience I need to convince. If it's a tough audience or I need to back up a quantitative statement, well, I need some data, yes. So basically, you just run a different analysis with the data available. So a couple of lessons learned. If data are not available, use proxies, so different set of data that kind of justify the same point. Maybe the analysis is not as good, as perfect as you visualize at the very beginning, but that's the best proxy. Or you can actually decide to, not to perform the analysis because the audience doesn't need to be convinced with numbers. So when you run the analysis, there are different scenarios. Ideal scenario is that you have the piece of data, you run your analysis, this is supporting exactly the point that you wanted to make. Well, that's perfect, everybody's happy. Scenario 2, as we said, there are no data. So you try to find either delete the specific analysis or find a different analysis. Scenario 3 is you run the analysis, but actually they prove a different point. Your hypothesis is wrong. Or maybe it's right, but it's a minor point. Remember at the very beginning, we said there is a matrix 2 by 2 through which we prioritize the root cause hypothesis. And we said, let's prioritize the one that are very likely to be true and the one that have high impact on the problem that we are analyzing. Maybe we discover it's true, the hypothesis is true, but the impact is very minor. Or is not true at all. Well, in that case, we need to go back to our storyline, probably delete this slide if the point is not relevant, or change the slide, the title, because maybe now the point is different. Potentially, if the analysis show a completely different direction, we can potentially need to rerun the full storyline. It can happen, rarely, but it can happen. But my point is, pre-analysis, analysis are circles. There is a lot of interaction. It's not going to be infinite. So usually after 1 or 2 interaction, you find the right nice storyline, nice message, the correct storyline, correct messages, and so you can proceed. But 1 or 2 interaction usually happen. So when you run the analysis based on hypothesis, can be that they show different results compared to what we were expecting. Quiz time. What should you do if you can find the data you plan to use for a ghost slide? Okay, that's correct. Very good. Okay. Let's move ahead. Okay, so let's move ahead. What we focus so far is the diagnosis. So focusing on generating hypotheses, prioritizing them, and validating them with analysis. Now we go on the design phase. So once we identify uh, the root cause, we analyze them, and we use the example of the ticketing machine in kiosk that are, in stations that are broken. Now we need to go in solution mode. So let's try to find what can we do to fix these problems. So, and we take as an example for our exercise another problem. So we have another root cause of our problem, that are too many different types of tickets that are confusing users. Now what we want to do is, starting from this hypothesis, let's assume we did our analysis, we prepare our slide with all the evidences. So this is not an hypothesis anymore, it's a fact. There's a root cause of our issue. Now we need to find a solution. So now what we're going to do is working on the pre-analysis to find solutions. So what you need to do now is to first identify potential solutions to the problem, and then again identifying which of the potential solutions that you identified are the more relevant one. And here we're going to use the brainstorming to perform what is called divergent thinking. I don't know if you're already familiar with divergent thinking concept. Basically, we start from a problem. The problem is there are too many tickets and users are confused, and we generate as many ideas as possible. Free flow ideas is a brainstorming. I think that you already seen this slide if you were in the first chapter of problem solving, but basically there are two ways to do this brainstorming to generate ideas. The first one is creating some categories. So for example, the issue is there are too many tickets, and solutions can belong to area 1, area 2, area 3, and then generate some detailed ideas behind it. Or we can go free flow, generate as many ideas as possible, and try to group them up in buckets. Depends on how your brain usually process information. I'm more like a top-down person, so I like to first create categories and then detail them down in examples. But let's use the cows first approach. So now we have an issue that is, there are too many tickets, customers are confused, and we need to generate as many ideas as possible to solve this issue. Sorry. Question for you. What ideas can you generate to, it depends on budget. I don't know if yes, depends on budget. So Raphael, that's a good point. When you are in the divergent phase, don't put constraint. I agree, budget is a constraint for sure. But from the moment you put constraint, you're already filtering out very good ideas, potentially very good ideas. So no constraint at the very beginning. You need to generate ideas. If there are no weak ideas or wrong ideas, it means that you haven't generated enough ideas. So you need to generate ideas, and then you include constraint later on. Choose two best types of, okay. Group a class comfortable, okay. Anything else? Build an intuitive app, okay. Yeah, these are all good ideas. Again, the rule here is free flow. You don't have to kill any idea so far, even though some maybe are not applicable, some they're too costly, some they're not, doesn't make much sense. Now is the time to generate as many ideas as possible. Good. So here there are some examples of ideas. So AI can help a lot here. So couple of lessons. It's forbidden to shoot down ideas, as we said. So let me close the chat. And as I was saying, if you just put constraint now, it can limit the participants' ideas. So AI, probably already use AI for generating ideas. That's super useful. So there is an additional AI tool that is going to be very helpful for generating ideas. Also, in this case, is built upon hundreds of top consulting projects. So it's fine-tuned for generating idea consulting styles. And I want to do some exercise now. So I want you to start with a how question that you define in the problem solving one module. If you don't have it, you can refer to the question at the bottom of the slide. How can the energy required to train and run frontier AI models be supplied 100% from climate neutral sources by 2030? And I want to individually think of 5, 10 solutions to your problem. No filter, no constraint so far, free flow idea. And then you can use GPT to provide additional ideas. And we're going to provide the link of the GPT tool in the chat. So let me stop here. Let's take a second. Okay. So let's take 8 minutes. Let's take 4 or 5 minutes on your own, list down as many ideas as possible. And then the last 3 or 4 minutes, you can use the ChatGPT tool to integrate your brainstorming. Okay. So I mentioned before that you have two submission to make today to unlock the brainstorming online course. This is the second one. So I would ask you to share. There should be a link in the chat. Also, the chat with ChatGPT about expanding your brainstorming. So if you submit both these and the chat about the ghost slide, it will unlock the brainstorming online course. Good. Okay. So basically, as we said, AI is always a tool to not a substitute, but integrate human work. So you start the solution brainstorming, then you use the idea generation tool to expand it, and finally, you need to prioritize the teams. So how can we do that? We started from the divergent thinking. So no rules, no constraint, free flow ideas. Now we generated a lot of different ideas. We cannot move ahead with too many ideas. So we need to have a convergent thinking to decide which of them are more valid. These two phases should always be separated. Force is free flow without constraint, and then you add all the constraint in terms of whatever you want afterwards in the initiatives prioritization. So, for example, here there was a slide with some potential solutions identified before. We deprioritize a few of them purely based on experience, gut feeling. Plus, another important element is at this point of the analysis is going back to the scope and constraint of the project. For example, we discussed about, I don't remember who said in the chat, there was a problem with budget. Yes, if that was a constraint that was given at the beginning of the project, now is the time to introduce the constraint. So we need to filter out all the initiatives that most likely will exceed the budget. Or if there is any specific focus for the client, then we need to prioritize the initiatives that focus exactly where the clients wants to go. So aligning with the scope and constraint of the project at this moment in time will help leave out all the solutions that are secondary, not to be prioritized. So let's go back to our document, our storyline, and we also here apply the pyramid principle. So basically, now we prioritize a few solutions. What it would be nice to do, and what I suggest to do, is always to group in 2, 3, maximum 4 buckets. For example, here the prioritization define 4 different solutions, and these are being consolidated in 3 buckets: simplification and integration, contentless cards, information and support. So it's easier to communicate, is easier also to visualize in a document. So basically, we have a statement. We can make Kanban bus tickets easier to buy and encourage more users to adopt buses. And to do that, we have 6 different initiatives, solutions, grouped in 3 buckets that we can propose to the client. Let me stop here for 1 second before moving ahead. The next step will be analysis related to solutions. I want to ask if you have any question here. You're okay with time? Yes. So any question about how to prioritize, how to identify potential solution with the brainstorming, and how to prioritize them. So to identify potential valid solutions. So here we have not estimated yet. We have not done any analysis yet. So this is pure based on our experience, our gut feeling, opinion of our boss, our teammates. So we identified some potential solution. We don't know yet if they're going to bring the results that we expect. We're going to do that in the analysis phase. So far, it's more like generating ideas and prioritizing a few ideas that the
look seems more promising. Any question? Okay, so let's move ahead. Sorry, in the chat, unfortunately, I cannot see the chat here. No question. Okay, so let's move ahead. Okay, so now we generated some initiatives to solve the issues. We prioritize them based on experience, gut feeling. So we selected a few of them. Now we need to do the analysis to see whether these initiatives bring actually results, the results that we expect. So this goes back to what we call predictive analysis before. So basically we need to estimate the impact, future outcome of some action today. Okay, so how can we recommend initiatives? But we need to define what's the impact to recommend an initiative. So how can we do it? There are 3 steps. There is a process in 3 steps. The first one is we have an initiative. We need to brainstorm on the potential impact of these initiatives. So basically, for example, we want to introduce some app that make easier for the customer to buy tickets. We want to define what would this app imply for the client. Would, for example, increase the customer engagement, would increase the number of tickets sold, any impact. So without quantifying, but we need to define potential metrics, potential impact that this initiative can have. Second step, we need to prioritize the metrics that are more relevant. For example, I give you the example of creating this app can increase the number of customers, increase the engagement of customers. Well, the engagement is not really relevant. I want to increase the number of customers, the number of users of the bus. So this is prioritized. And then I want to estimate the impact of this initiative. So how many new customers can these initiatives generate? Now we're going to do a simulation to be more practical, and we're going to focus on one potential initiative that we generated before and we prioritized before, that is introducing tap and go cards that calculate the fare automatically. So makes the life of customers, of travelers, much easier. So first, we need to brainstorm the impact of the initiatives on different metrics. So exercise for you, and I want you to do it in breakout rooms. I want you to take 6 minutes, then we're going to have 2 minutes of discussion, thinking, these tap and go cards that calculate the fare automatically, what kind of impact can have? What kind of metrics can it impact? Qualitative, of course, we don't know, we cannot quantify yet, but what are the benefits? Why should we do that? So please, let's go in breakout rooms. 6 minutes. So it's 34, so we come back at 40 and we have a little bit of discussion. Good. Okay. So who wants to share some ideas on what could be the impact of the initiatives? Alfonso?
Yes.
Yes. So what your groups discuss about potential impact of the initiative of tap and go cards?
We discussed like 2 main topics. The first one would be like the friction probably for the user. It will be easier for them to interact with the card instead of trying to go to the kiosk and interact with different types of ticketing systems. Or so one of the metrics that we were dealing with is probably the time it will take for someone to go to the kiosk, buy a ticket, probably ask for directions or guidance, and then going to the bus rather than just using the card. However, we also discussed the scenario of the revenue. So maybe we'll have like a huge cost at the beginning, but we will have to probably try to understand like if it's going to be like a huge investment at the beginning versus the cost that will eventually will be diluted over time, probably by using the ticketing system. That's pretty much what we discussed.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Just another couple.
My team did discuss some pros and cons, like some of the negative and positive impact of the tap and go. So for the pros, everyone thinks it's going to be an increase of the riderships because it's more convenience to people, and maybe some cost reductions in terms of like releasing the physical cards. However, in terms of cons, it could be some problems. For example, like because it's related to technology, so there would be like an engineering teams that had to deal with apps and maybe like systems and maintenance and bugs, and also maybe we have to cut some of the costs if the tap and go is embedded with some like Visa card, MasterCard, so we have to pay like our partners a little amount of money for the partnership cost, and also for the tech savvies, for the non-tech savvy groups of people who is using the bus system, which is most likely the senior, there will be a problem for them to get used to the new system.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, these are all good ideas. So just to recap, what we've done so far is generating a long list of potential matrix impacts of the initiatives. Next step will be to define what of these matrix are the more relevant. But first, let's take a break. It's well-deserved breaks. So it's 44 and my clock. We meet again. Let's do 10 minutes break. We meet again at 54. So let's meet in 10 minutes. Hello. Let's come back. Please switch on the camera. The last 50 minutes, and then we're done. Good. Okay, okay. Welcome back. Please switch on all the camera. Okay, so just to recap, last thing that we did was to generate a long list of potential metric that can be impacted by our initiative. Now, what we need to do is to prioritize the metric. So it's the divergent convergent concept that we also utilized before. So you mentioned a couple of very interesting metrics. Here I have on the left-hand side of the slide some example of metric that could be impacted by the initiative of the tap-on card. So how can we prioritize? So first point is oftentimes a single metric is enough. So to justify an initiative, you don't need to you need to decline the single initiative on multiple metrics. A single one is enough. Usually is a financial one. So you see how much impact the profit. The second concept is it's always good to go back to the scope and constraint of the project to understand exactly what are the key priorities for the client. So for example, potential criteria to prioritize the impacted matrix that you see on the left-hand side could be the effect of the initiative, the financial impact, or how easy is to estimate the metric or the priorities of the client. So there are different things. Usually the effect, the size of the impact in terms of money, most of the time is the most important metric, but you never know. In this case, going back to the problem definition of Kong-Won buses, if I recall, the client was mostly looking at ridership, pollution, and accident. So it was not much financial objective, but was more like a ridership, pollution, and accident. So given that, a potential proposal of prioritization could be to look at customer satisfaction, ridership, revenues, and impact on traffic. This coherent with what the client is looking for and is a subset of all the metrics. It doesn't mean that accessibility index and operational efficiency are not important, but we can deprioritize them because they're not top priority for the client, and maybe there is complicated to estimate them. Do you remember what's the last step? So we created, we defined potential metric impacted by the initiatives. We define a subset of them that could be most interesting. What's the last step? Third and last step of the analysis. Now we know what metrics we want to measure the initiative on. What should we do now? Winifred. So we have the initiatives. We have the metrics impacted. What should we do now?
I'm thinking based on like the initiatives, the metrics, we can kind of going back to that like 80-20 you mentioned and sort of apply like the most pragmatic solution that has like the highest impact. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay. So actually we did already a prioritization based on the most relevant metric and based on the scope and constraint of the project. Now, as Alfonso wrote in the chat, we need to work on the proposed solution. Actually, the immediate next step is to evaluate what's the impact on the metric. For example, we identified a specific metric, for example, is the impact on the profit. Well, let's see what's the impact. Let's quantify the impact. So far, we just say that the impact on profit, for example, is an important metric that you want to measure the initiatives on. Now we need to do the impact, the calculation of what's the impact. So there are several approaches to calculate the impact of an initiative. Usually we can split in top-down and bottom-up. Top-down is the quickest way, also called back on the envelope calculation, to provide the first estimate. It's gonna take anything anywhere between 10 minutes to a day, or you can do a full bottom-up calculation, creating Excel models or complicated business cases, and can take up to really a lot of time. It depends when you use one or the other. It depends on how important is the metric that you're assessing, how important is to convince the client. So always important to align with project leader or whoever is managing you if you need to invest a lot of time. But I want to do, so find a good estimation starts with good data. We already say that. I want to do an extra step. So oftentimes, you want to calculate the impact, you don't have the data needed to do this calculation. And I want to provide some proxy that you can use to estimate impact of initiatives when you don't have actually data, you need to collect the data on your own. And I'm going to give you 5 different approaches. The first one is testing. So for each approach, I will try to divide internal, external whenever possible. Testing is whenever possible, well, you have an initiative, how to calculate the impact of initiatives? Well, you run it, you do a test, a pilot test. It usually takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, so oftentimes it's not possible, but that's the best way, if possible, if time is available, it's not too complicated, that's the best way. You see in real life what's the impact of an initiative. The second one is benchmark, and probably is the most used. So it can be an internal benchmark. We need to launch a new initiative, new product. We already have a similar one. Let's see how this perform after the launch, and then we can apply the same rules to the new product. Or external benchmark. Let's see what the competitors are doing. Here, the constraint can be data, especially if it comes from outside, can be a little bit hard to find. But usually that's the most used approach to do estimation of impact. Historical extrapolation. So if the product initiatives already have an history, so we can see what happened in the past and project trends in the future. That's another common way to do it. Or there are other correlation. I don't know, if you find some drivers behind what you're trying to analyze, and you project what you analyze based on drivers. It can be both with internal data and external data. Usually the relationship here is not very obvious to calculate because, as I was telling you, correlation is not causation. So it's something that requires a bit of data knowledge to do. So here the key points is that usually calculating the impact of initiative is not that easy. So using one of these proxies can help approximate the results. So, and second is usually what you need to predict is mostly the revenues top line. So whatever customers will do. This is usually the most hard and the typical things that you need to predict, while cost, investment, anything that is internal to the client, usually they are easier to predict and they have data. So you can work with their data. You don't need any proxy. So usually the top line, meaning revenues, and any customer behavior are the one that it's hard to predict, and you need to rely on some proxies to do that. Okay, so what I want you to do now is a little exercise. So referring to sorry, let me remove the chat. Referring to our case and the tap and go initiatives, I want you to try to do a top-down estimate of 2 metrics: the ridership, so an increase in absolute terms of the number of users, and the traffic index. So I'm going to provide you with some data here. I want you to take a couple of minutes and then come up with a potential approach to measure the increase in absolute number of users and the percentage decrease in traffic based on this data. This is an example of top-down approach with some high-level numbers. We provide a high-level estimate. So take a couple of minutes, then I will call some of you. So please try to do these calculations. Okay. I don't know if you're done, but let's try to, to do some calculation here. I don't need the number. I mean, I want to have discussion more on the logic. How would you use all these numbers together? So does anybody want to volunteer just to, provide a potential structure of calculation? Let's start with the ridership increase in absolute number of users. Gabriela, do you wanna try? No? Okay.
It's like the 80% of 15 million.
Sorry. So again, so apart from the number, share what variable would you use, how to do the calculation?
The total population, 15 million, and the percentage population commuting daily, it's around 80%.
Okay.
So it will be around 80% of 15 million, around 12 million or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the total population that commute daily. What else? So the objective is to calculate the potential absolute number, increase in absolute number of the user of the bus. So you have a total population commuting, 12 million.
Yeah. According to my calculation, the total would be 842,000.
Yeah, apart from the number, let's focus on more on the process. So let's start with Alfonso, I think. Stop. So it was 12 million people, the population that is commuting daily. What do you do next?
Then you have 60% that is able to use, that find the ticketing experience poor, which is
Before that,
60% of.
Sorry, before that, you need to take the 22% that are the commuting population that use the bus. So of the 12 million, we take 22%.
Yeah.
The one that use the bus.
Yeah.
Okay. What's next? Sorry. Let's
yes. Go. And after that, you have around 60% that are not using the buses because they find the ticketing experience poor. So that's a potential increase in around 60% of that number.
Yep.
And another 15% that it's that will move to the bus if the tap to go is introduced.
Sorry, here I have one question.
Yeah.
Is the 15% of non-bus user here is already included in the 60% or not, or separated?
So we can assume that is included. It's an exercise. So we can do the assumption that you want. We can assume that is included. Here, the point is, this is a percentage of non-bus users. So it's the complement of 22%. So today, 22% of the population use the bus. So we need to target that 78% that are not currently using the bus. So we have 15 million times 80%. We have the population that is commuting. Times 78% is a commuting population non-using the bus. Then, if you assume that 50% is part of 60%, we need to do this 78% times 60%. We have the people that don't use a bus because they find the ticket experience poor, and out of which 15% would use a bus if tap and go is introduced. So these are percentages that could come from a focus group, for example, interviews from the client. So in this case, just multiplying all these percentages, we would have the whatever number it is not relevant. We would have the total population. Fine. I didn't want to put you in the spotlight on calculation, but this is an example of a top-down calculation. So taking a couple of metrics coming from focus group or interviews or reports and having a ballpark number. This is no correlation, no big Excel model, and you have a number. Most of the time, it's better to have a rough, quick calculation where you have a rough number rather than spending too much time to do the exact number. Because if you start with a top-down approach, then you can also refine it, maybe going bottom up and invest in time. But going immediately bottom up without knowing that the result could be risky, that you can waste maybe days or even weeks. Anyway, good. So here, fine, you're going to see the slide. I don't want to focus too much on the calculation, but here you see basically the issue 3. And in this case, yes, that 15% was part of the 60%. But fine. So you can see basically how the calculation is done. And also you can do that for the traffic decrease. Actually, part of the ridership increase is an input for the traffic decrease. You can spend a couple of minutes when you receive the slide. I don't want to go too much into the numbers today. So I don't know how familiar you are with structure trees, but this is super, super useful when you go with top-down estimation, it helped visualize and also communicate if needed the calculation that you did and how the different variables depends on each other. And this is a easy Excel that I would use if I need to do calculation. No strange, no sophisticated Excel model, just one sheet normal with data and a calculation. Okay, so top-down estimation are super useful and actually is what 90% of the time is required. I would not go with bottom-up calculation unless it's needed. And you can do a lot of different estimation. These are four buckets that are most typical, not exhaustive, most typical way you can use top-down estimation to calculate financial indicator, market size and revenues. This is typical for costs and potential investment. I think that market size and revenues usually is the one that are more prone to be used for for top-down calculation, because usually it's based on unknown numbers, while cost investment usually come from inside. So it's much easier to collect numbers and having more detailed calculation. Fine. So it's not the first time I'm saying that, but this module I'm going to give you an overview of several elements, the slide, storylining, and analysis, but you're going to deep dive on each of them more in detail later on. So this slide, just to say that we don't want to discuss too much in detail how to do analysis, because we're going to have a separate session to do that. So let's try to recap. We mentioned that we have three categories, three types of analysis. The one that are descriptive of a single moment in time, causal analysis that explain what are the triggers behind an event, predictive analysis where we try to estimate what's happening in the future. Then we talk about initiative structuring, so generating with divergent thinking as many options, then try to converge and select a few of them. We mentioned the three steps to calculate the impact of initiatives, starting with defining what are the metrics potentially impacted. We identify the metrics that are more interesting. Usually one is more than enough, especially looking at the constraint and the objective of the project. And then we measure the impact top-down, bottom-up. And then we identified some proxies to come up with potential estimation of the impact when we don't have numbers, coming from benchmark to testing, piloting, or other correlation. So this is where we are now. So I want to take a little step ahead. So far, in the diagnosis phase, we did we understood how we can generate ideas, prioritize them, and generate ghost slides for root causes behind the problem. Then we apply more or less the same concept for initiatives. So we didn't go again on the concept of ghost slides and storylining, but this applies also for the initiatives. You have done that for the root causes of the problem. You do that also for the initiatives. So you have in the structuring pre-analysis the ghost slide that you fill up actually with the results of the analysis. Now we have a list of analysis of initiatives, so we estimated the impact of the different initiatives, but we are not done yet, because maybe you have 10 different initiatives, 5 different initiatives. You need to prioritize them. To properly communicate to the client, you need to come up with a sort of waves of implementation, prioritization of these initiatives. Having the list of initiatives with their impact is not enough. So this is the concept of the storyline applied to the solutions. We use always the top-down approach. So we have a general statement that is we can make Kongwon buses tickets easier to buy and encourage more users to adopt buses. And we identified a few initiatives to make this happen, a few solutions. We group them in 3 buckets. Now, we ran the analysis. For each initiative, we identify the impact. We need to prioritize them. So also here, prioritization, you always need to have some dimensions. I use a matrix with 2 dimensions. Usually it's the most common way to prioritize initiatives. So when you come up with initiatives, usually the best way is to map the initiatives by impact, meaning how much of impact in the metric that we assessed before this initiative is generating, and what's investment. So we want to prioritize initiatives that need low investment and bring high impact. So mapping this on a 2x2 matrix allow to visually see where the initiatives stand comparing to each other in terms of these two dimensions. One important point is that oftentimes, when it comes to identifying and studying the initiatives, there are different work streams. So this analysis should be done combining the results of all the different work streams. So it's a kind of final wrap-up analysis where the different work streams bring together initiatives that they analyze and measured, so we can confront all of them on the same dimensions, and we can define which one are more interesting and which one we need to prioritize. For example, we can deprioritize the one with a high investment and low impact. In general, more than deprioritize, what usually happens is that we can put them in waves of implementation. So we can prepare a sort of Gantt chart where we show implementation phases, and we can say, look, the 1 and 3, for example, are the top priority, 1 and 8, whatever, the top priority, wave 1. We also call it low-hanging fruits, low investment, high impact. Once we implemented this action, we go to wave 2 on initiative 6 and 5, and then wave 3 will be, I mean, whatever are, I don't remember, the one that we cannot see now, 4, 2, and 7. So you can either delete the initiatives that are bringing not much impact and require higher investment, or deprioritize in terms of implementation. So the output of this part usually is creating waves of implementation, prioritizing the initiatives with low investment and high impact. If these two dimensions, investment and impact, are the one that you want to choose. So Raphael asks, what are the pros and cons of a binary prioritization framework against a more robust one like, I don't know this RISE, so I don't know, I cannot compare exactly with this one. Out of my experience, I always use this two-dimension matrix. Could be impact investment or impact complexity. Complexity does not include investment, but also qualitative assessment of how difficult it is to implement. Well, I mean, if you have two dimensions, I think it's popular because it's a good compromise between being comprehensive, because I think that impact and complexity are kind of what really matters, and being quick in the assessment, and also it's easy to communicate and to visualize. So this is the benefit of having a 2x2 matrix. The RISE, don't know, Raphael, if you want to explain quickly what's RISE, I don't know it, so I cannot compare directly. So 4 dimensions. So again, out of my experience, I've never seen it. It seems to me very complicated because it multiply the assessment not just on 2 dimensions, but on 4, and then also complicated to communicate. And we say that it's not written in stone that it should be 2 dimension. It's not written in stone that should be impact and investment. So if your company or your project leader or whoever prefer another way to prioritize, I would do that. Otherwise, if I have to choose, I would always try to use the easier method. And again, 2x2 is 2 dimension is compromise, easy but comprehensive. It's not just impact, you also measure the investment or complexity, and especially it's easy to visually communicate. That's super important.
Yeah, my question would be more because in my company, everything is all frameworks based on RISE, right? Like, and for me, sometimes it's hard to get all these 4 dimensions, right? And I would like to understand like what are the pros and cons of a binary one, simplified against this one, and how can I try to convince people to move to a simpler one?
Well, actually, if it's like ingrained in company culture processes, I don't know the exact situation, but I don't think there's much room for maneuver. So actually, if I were you, the first thing is to apply whatever is used in the company. So this is the approach. That's it. It's more complicated, but probably they use that approach is because, I don't know, the complication is justified by the benefit. If I don't have any constraint, I would try to go in an easier, simpler format. But it's not like convincing. It's not, I mean, for me, the only argument I would use is easier to communicate, I mean, just 2 dimensions. But if the company wants to use a different prioritization framework, I would just apply whatever is used in the company. So I would not try to convince. Yeah. I don't know if the answer you were expecting, but that's it. So anyway, regardless of what you do, prioritization is key for obvious reason, because you cannot
move ahead 5, 10 different initiatives at the same time. So you need to be focused. And in my opinion, again, prioritization is not choosing, but is defining different waves in general. Then it depends, but in general, it's different waves of implementation. Okay, so before moving to the last step of the process, I want one of you to read out the oath of the ultimate problem solver prioritization. These are kind of the 4 pillars that I want you to remember. Raphael, since you asked the question, would you mind to read aloud these 4 points so that we know?
Sure. One, I will assess each solution or task to focus on what drives the most value with the least effort. I will use a clear prioritization framework, such as a 2 versus 2 matrix to evaluate them. 3, I will involve stakeholders in the prioritization process to ensure alignment and manage expectations. And 4, I will focus on quick wins when possible to build momentum and show early results while tracking long-term tasks in parallel.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we arrived to the last step. So now we quantify the root causes, we quantify the solutions, we prioritize with a RISE or 2x2 or whatever the framework you want to use. We prioritize initiatives, so we created some waves of implementation. So we suggest the client that initiatives 1 and 2 should be prioritized because they are low-hanging fruits. Now we need to provide a solution synthesis so that we are able to sum up all the different steps in one slide or in a couple of minutes. Before doing that, quick poll. Let's take a couple of seconds here. Why is the final presentation much easier when you follow a hypothesis-driven approach from the start? Exactly. Good, 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 good. Okay, let's stop it here. So this is the point I was mentioning before when there was a question about the investment in time, if it's worth it. The thing I said before and I restate again, I can promise you that if you didn't invest time before, first of all, you run a lot of analysis and most of them were not useful. And second, you have the analysis, you have the results. Putting together a story, starting from the analysis is a nightmare. The story will never be clear, well structured if you didn't do it in advance. So the investment time to create a storyline and the ghost slides, both for the root cause and as well as for the solutions, I think is super worth it. It's an investment and it's frustrating, but it's super useful. So communication in business, again, goes back to the pyramid principle. We already seen it several ways. So everything starts with the answer, the conclusion. So we should first give the main message to ensure that the audience immediately understands the key takeaways. Then we need to support the answer with key arguments, 2 4 reasons that justify the conclusion. And then we should back up the arguments with evidences, data examples or whatever. And this is the most effective way to communicate in business environment. It's logical, is easy to understand, and keep the attention of the audience because you start with the conclusion. So here I don't want to go in detail. This is an example of executive summary. So a single slide that summarizes all the points of a potential project on the Tap and Go Kong bus network, starting from the context with initiatives down to the risks and next steps. So basically we summarize everything in a single slide. So also here we have another GPT, and this is the last one of the day that is super useful to review the final presentation or the executive summary and get a feedback. So also here we're gonna share in the chat a link to get access to this tool. And so as we repeated several times, this is a tool that doesn't substitute the work. So basically you prepare your draft, then you run it through AI to have a evaluation, a validation, some suggestion. So then you can finalize the presentation based on the inputs. Good. So this is a zoom out of what we have done so far. So we improved the situation with one initiative that was Tap and Go card.
and we identified the metrics, how they're going to impact. But if we zoom out, there is a lot more. There are a lot of more initiatives. So this same process that we did for initiatives of Tap and Go can be multiplied by all the initiatives. That's why usually the solution part is split in different work streams, because I mean it's a complex and comprehensive exercise. The point here is, if you have the problem solving approach, it's easy to see where you are in the overall scheme of the project. Otherwise, it's very easy to get lost among the many initiatives and the many analyses that are developed. Okay, so with this, we basically, with the prioritization of the initiatives and the Gantt chart and the executive summary at the end, we finalize the Kongwan buses project. Usually, the executive summary that is done at the very end will be, fun enough, the fourth slide of the document usually, but actually it's done at the very end, summarizing all the insights. I think that we reached more or less the end of the session. We also have some minutes ahead. We are 10-15 minutes ahead. So questions here. Let me stop sharing for 1 second. Any question on the last part, or also previous, before wrapping up everything? So first of all, I want to ask you to take some time. Also, we have time before the end. We can also do it now, to leave your feedback. That is super important. And also we give you some dashboards rewards. I think you should have a link to do that. Maybe you can also take 3 minutes to do that now, since we have time. So let's do that. Okay, so let's wrap up everything. So let's zoom out and see what we saw over the last 2 sessions, the previous one and the one of today. So this is the 8 steps of the problem solving. So we started defining the problem and structuring the problem in the previous session. Today, starting from the structure of the session 1, we started to do the pre-analysis of the diagnosis phases, meaning creating a storyline, creating ghost slides, and creating a plan to collect all the data to run the analysis in the ghost slides. We moved to step 4, the analysis. We saw different ways to do it: top down, bottom up, for the estimation, causal, predictive analysis, for a different way to do analysis. And so at the end, we estimated, we did analysis to prove the root causes. Then we move to bucket 5, that is structuring the pre-analysis for the initiatives. So once we validated the root causes, we move to solutions. Also here, the process is the same. We generated with the brainstorming all the potential solutions. Then we identify the most interesting one. We prepare a storyline. We prepare ghost slides. We prepare a work plan to collect data to run the analysis on the solutions. And then we run the analysis. It's going to be some iteration. Some analysis will prove or disprove our hypothesis, some iteration, till we have a full set of analysis, already a storyline prepared, because in the phase 3 and 5 of the process, we did our storyline. So we have our storyline, we have our analysis and root causes all quantified. We move to step 7. We do prioritization. So we tell the client which initiatives are more interesting, which are the long-hanging fruits, and which one instead should be deprioritized and run maybe in wave 2 and 3. And finally, based on all of these, we can create an executive summary, a summary that can go at the beginning of the presentation, that summarized in a top-down pyramid principle approach all the process. This is it. Sometimes you will need to expand the analysis, sometimes you need to contract it, sometimes maybe for a single piece of analysis will take weeks, sometimes you will move very quickly because you're going to do top-down calculation, you don't need to spend too much time, and that's fine, that's part of the game. So over time you will learn how to balance how much analysis is needed and how much you can go top-down. In general, if you're not confident, I think aligning with your project leader or boss is the best way to do it. That's it. I think that we arrived to the end. So thank you for the attention. I know it's Friday. I think it's starting. We are all tired. It's a difficult moment.
you have at the beginning of the presentation that you will receive also my email. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or comment or you want to discuss anything. I'm always happy to follow up and if I can be helpful. Thanks again for your participation. Enjoy the weekend and talk to you soon.